Tilde, Brexit. It is unsurprisingly a massive issue, and one which seems to have a lot of information and indeed a lot of misinformation surrounding it. So let's try and clear up a little bit of that, shall we? And it seems by far the hottest of button issues surrounding Brexit is of course the topic of immigration, especially given the seemingly ever-increasing rate of problems stemming from areas that have high immigrant populations. Now, I can already hear some of the criticism surrounding this, and it almost invariably revolves around the term racist. Indeed, that seems to be the buzzword of choice for anyone looking to completely shut down any sort of conversation around this topic, or even to simply attempt to discredit someone who is merely going to provide an objective look at the information that we have. The reason that the topic of immigration is important is as follows. First of all, immigration and emigration have a very important impact on any country's economy. Second of all, immigration and emigration has an important effect on the culture of a country. And culture is a very important aspect of whatever country it is that you happen to be in. Indeed, the shared set of cultural values that everyone lives by within a certain area is kind of what defines that country. And this is something that happens regardless of race. If you took two populations which are genetically very similar, say the United States of America and Canada, and swapped them around, then those original two countries are no longer the same. As another example, if you took the population of Japan and the population of China, again, two very similar ethnic populations, and swapped them around, then you have completely changed the culture of the original country. Unless, of course, the new people moving into that new geographical area remove from themselves their original cultural values and replace those with the cultural values of the area that they have moved into, i.e. assimilating with the local population. Now, that assimilation does not have to be absolute. Indeed, partial assimilation is what results in the gradual change of countries over time, the natural evolution of culture and society. However, the important thing to note here is if you have a culture or a society that you wish to continue existing, you cannot have that culture be completely swamped by another. Because what then happens is a replacement instead of a natural evolution. And these are two things which need to be distinguished from each other. The reason, for instance, that a lot of people want to move to the UK is because they wish to live in the culture that is present now. However, if too many people from too many different countries arrive and effectively replace the local population, then that culture changes very rapidly. And rather than the small group of people coming in, acclimatizing to the culture and therefore the resident culture remaining reasonably unchanged, but with the small natural evolutions that would happen over time anyway, you would instead end up with a displacement of the resident population and thus a very rapid shift in culture, which in some cases works to the detriment of the resident culture or indeed to its outright destruction. So with these facts in mind, it is important to look at immigration and emigration as objectively as possible. After all, immigration and emigration, as we've said, is necessary for cultures to ensure that they don't become a totally isolated and stagnated nation. However, it is important to understand that there must be a limit placed somewhere. Realistically, there is only so fast that people and the infrastructures of society can ever adapt to meet new demands. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into some data. We're going to look at the rates of immigration and emigration from the UK to Europe, from Europe to the UK, from the UK to areas outside the Eurozone, and from areas outside the Eurozone into the UK. We'll be assessing some of the financial costs and financial benefits of all of this, and then we'll have a little look at some of the potential outcomes from the not-too-distant future. So let's start with net migration from the EU. Migration from the European Union soared following the addition of 8 Eastern European countries in 2004. The net flow reduced following the financial crisis, but then more than doubled between 2012 and 2014 to return again to record levels as freedom of movement was extended to new EU entrants Romania and Bulgaria. The latest figure for the year ending September 2015 is 172,000. In the late 90s, early 2000, EU immigration accounted for a reasonably small amount of immigration into the UK, with non-EU immigration accounting for a lot more. As you can see here, both increased significantly from the 2000s onwards. A minor dip from the EU, as you can see, owing to the financial crisis. Non-EU actually increased in that time, bringing us up to 2015, where non-EU now accounts for 191,000. If you were to plot non-EU and EU together to give you the absolute total over time from 1996 to 2015, you would get a graph that looks something like this. As you can see, a fairly consistent increase with a slight downturn during the recession from 2009 through to 2012, and then a pretty consistent uptake since then. To put that into some degree of perspective for you, the current population of Britain is about 64 million, and these consistently high levels of immigration has led to the UK population being about 13% foreign-born and about 8.5% non-British citizens. The share of migrants varies significantly across all of the regions of the UK. In 2014, the number of foreign-born people relative to total population was greatest in Inner London at 39% and second greatest in Outer London at 33%. The region with the third highest proportion of migrants was the South East, with 13% of the population being foreign-born. India, Poland, and Pakistan are the top three countries of birth for the foreign-born, accounting respectively for 9.2, 9.1, and 6% of the total, although Poland tops the list of foreign citizens in the UK with 15.1% to India's 7.3%. So as we can see, rather unsurprisingly, the vast amount of the immigration that comes to the UK seems to concentrate in the larger cities, London taking a rather large amount, followed up, as you can see, by Greater Manchester and various cities in and around the Midlands. So what has this left us with in totals? Well, starting in 2004, just under 1.5 million, going up to 2014, just a slight smidgen over 3 million, as part of an absolutely consistent increase. So obviously and quite clearly we have a very consistent increase in the number of people coming to the United Kingdom. But what about people leaving the United Kingdom? Well, there's around 1.2 million British-born people living in another EU country according to figures provided by the UN, and around 800,000 will be workers and their dependents. This is much less than the estimated 3.3 million people born in another EU country who live in the UK, of which 2.1 million are working. To put that into a slightly more visibly easy to digest way, it would look something like this plotted on a graph. Still considerably more people coming in than going out. So we appear to be setting ourselves up for an overpopulation scenario, with large numbers of people coming into the central cities, displacing the local British population, causing large shifts in culture in those particular areas. Obviously, the large increase in people leads to increased demand for housing, thus driving up house prices and rent rates in those cities, which is, of course, why it is increasingly common for British people to simply not own a home if they are under the age of 30, and indeed many of them giving up entirely on the prospect of ever owning one. So there appears to be a few very distinct social costs already, as well as a couple of financial implications, not only in regards to housing prices, but also in regards to the benefits, welfare, and tax systems. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail right about now. But before we really get into it, I'm going to have to quickly introduce you to the concept of national insurance, specifically national insurance numbers, better known as NINOs. A national insurance number is basically a state social security number. Every person living in the UK should have one. It basically tracks how much tax you've paid and the amount of benefits you receive. And this is important because there are very few benefits in the UK that you can claim without a national insurance number. In fact, as far as I'm aware, you can't. But there are also certain circumstances in which you can claim national insurance credits, which basically means you can claim benefits out of the system without having to have ever paid into it. And that is very important for what I'm about to show you next. We also need to really quickly cover all of the EU countries and when they joined the EU, and this is divided into several bands. EU 14, the original 14 member states, EU 8, an expansion when a whole load of new countries came in, and EU 2, the addition of an extra 2. The EU 14 countries: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, and Sweden. The EU 8, also known as the A8, added during the 2004 enlargement of the European Union: the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. And finally, EU 2 added in the 2007 expansion: Romania and Bulgaria. Now, why is all of that relevant, you might ask? Good question. As we've already covered, if you wish to come to the UK and you wish to work and claim benefits here, you need to have a national insurance number. And this chart shows for you the number of national insurance numbers issued to people from those groups of countries over the last few years. In fact, between 2004 to 2015, 4.75 million national insurance numbers were issued to EU nationals. In 2015, a record 630,000 NINOs were issued, including 209,000 to Romanians and Bulgarians. There is a wide disparity between the numbers of NINOs issued and official estimates of immigration. Part of the reason is because NINOs are also issued to those who come to the UK for less than a year before returning home. People coming for less than a year are not classified as long-term migrants or included in official estimates for net migration. However, this does not explain all the disparity, as estimates for both long-term and short-term immigrants still total less than the number of NINOs recorded as being used. NINO data is an actual record of the number issued, while migration figures are an estimate based on survey data. This has led to concerns that the official EU net migration figures could be an underestimate and that the actual figure may be even higher. The government has been pressed on all sides to look into this issue. One way would be for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs to report how many NINOs issued to non-UK nationals are still active in the UK, and have a recent record of national insurance or tax payments. The government has so far avoided addressing this question, leading to the UK Statistics Authority publicly writing to the Office of National Statistics to stress the importance of an explanation prior to the June referendum. I cannot stress the importance of this piece of information. This is basically a bald-faced admission from our government in the UK that they cannot tell you how many people are coming to, claiming benefits, or working in the UK. In fact, it would appear that they are attempting to deliberately obfuscate this data. And this is kind of important, especially in regards to a graph such as this. This graph, the bottom line, indicates the estimated number of immigrants from the EU 8 countries. The top line is the number of national insurance numbers issued to people coming from EU 8 countries. And just to refresh your memory, we are talking about the A8 countries: the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. Nearly twice as many, in some cases more than twice as many national insurance numbers issued as people estimated to have entered. That is a terrifying discrepancy. And from this, the only reasonable conclusion is that when the government tells you that this is the number of people who have come into the country, do not believe them. So how big of a gap is left once you actually factor in the short-term immigration, that is, people who stay for less than a year before returning home? Well, in light of the 2011 census results, the Office of National Statistics confirmed in 2013 that they had underestimated EU 8 immigration between 2004 and 2008 because the International Passenger Survey had failed to cover adequately the points of arrival favoured by Eastern Europeans. The data also indicates that despite the changes introduced as a result of that discovery, a gap of 70,000 has persisted over the period of 2009 to 2013. So what about the pattern of national insurance numbers issued to EU2 immigrants, that is, Bulgaria and Romania? Rather unsurprisingly, and perhaps rather sadly, we see a very similar pattern, with a massive discrepancy opening up on 2014 to 2015. One possible explanation for this large increased gap, though, is that many of the applicants for NINOs were not recent immigrants, but the applications were made by migrants who had already been in the UK for some time. This was because there was a restriction on the right for EU2 nationals to work in the UK that were not fully removed until January 2014. However, if this were the case, it would simply mean that the EU2 immigration had been vastly underestimated during the period 2007 to 2013, and that the IPS had done a poor job of identifying long-term immigrants from these countries as they arrived in the UK. So even one of the hypothetical explanations that could explain a part of this discrepancy also still only serves to highlight the fact that the British government has no idea how many people are actually in their own country. The same data around EU14 countries paints a picture that is just as bad. The estimated number of immigrants, as you can see, higher than the number of national insurance numbers issued until 2011, when that fact flips on its head. And this is a rather worrying trend. At least before 2011, you knew how many people there were and how many of them were not working. But if they don't have a national insurance number, they're not claiming benefits either. Post-2011, well, who really cares how many people are in your country as long as they're paying taxes or claiming benefits, right? So we've covered a reasonable amount of data about the EU immigration and non-EU immigration. So we've got a pretty good idea where most of the people who come to the UK are coming from. The largest non-EU contributors being India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, South Africa and Nigeria, and the largest EU contributors being Poland, Ireland, Germany, Romania and Bulgaria. But what does all of this mean in terms of the population of the United Kingdom? We touched on that a little bit earlier when we looked at the percentage of populations by region, but what does it mean for the overall population growth? Fortunately, this chart tells us everything we need to know. If we went for 0 net migration, we would eventually be able to stabilise the population of the UK within about 40 years. Taking us from the 65 million that we are now in 2015, and ever so slightly growing up to about 68 million in 2040. And that assumes 0 migration. No new people coming in other than the ones you breed yourself. The 3 projections, as you can see here, 105k, 185k and 265k, leading us to 72 million, just over 74 million, and about 77 million, respectively, by 2040. The important thing to note here is that the highest projection here assumes net migration of 265,000, a figure that we are currently over. As you may remember, the current intake into the UK is in the 360s. But if this highest projection is accurate and we somehow reduce the number of immigrants coming in, then 75% of the increase in population is going to be down to future migration. And something that is really important to notice here is that it is currently estimated that net migration plus births of foreign-born parents has accounted for 85% of the UK population growth since the year 2000, and that under the official high migration scenario, which is still a downplay on what is currently happening, the population is projected to rise by around 500,000 people a year, the equivalent of a new city the size of Liverpool every 365 days. I don't think it really needs to be said, but in a country whose infrastructure is already struggling to maintain the current number of people that it has, this is objectively too many people. But what of the cost? We constantly hear that diversity is a strength, and if this is true and there is some inherent workplace benefit to having a large number of immigrants in your country, then surely we will see this reflected in the fiscal results. After all, if people move to a country, they contribute, they work hard, they pay their taxes, then everyone wins because we all serve to gain from their effort, right? Unfortunately, that does not seem to be the case. A 2014 to 2015 study conducted by Migration Watch has found that the cost to the exchequer of migration for the same period was £17 billion. The cost of European immigration was over £1 billion. The paper, following previous research, also considered the impact separately of immigration from 2001 onwards, and found a significant difference between Eastern European and other European Economic Area migrants. For those who arrived from Eastern Europe, there was a fiscal cost of £2.8 billion, but this was offset by a fiscal contribution of £2.8 billion made by those who arrived from elsewhere in the European Economic Area in the same period. This made the overall effect of the 2014-15 of recent European Economic Area migration broadly neutral. Taking only these most recent arrivals gives a more favourable outcome because, like the UK-born, those who have been in the UK for some time tend to cost the exchequer more as they grow older and start families. The population in the UK from outside the European Economic Area, whatever the date of arrival, cost $15.6 billion in 2014 to 2015. Those who arrived in 2001 and thereafter cost $6.2 billion in the same year. Basically, no matter how many ways you slice it, immigration costs the UK billions of pounds every year. And while some migrants do come here, do contribute, and do actually produce a positive fiscal effect for the country, the reality is most do not. This data that we've just looked at factors in the economic benefit that the migrants bring to the UK, and it is still a net loss, objectively. And this is before we begin factoring in the other social problems that come from an increased population in regards to supply and demand. Increased house prices, for example. Increased pressure on healthcare and education. The NHS, for instance, recently admitted that they are spending upwards of £23 million a year on translators. That's £64,000 a day to cater for over 120 languages. So what about the cost of resettling these people? Well, to get some estimates down, we're going to use the American Center for Immigration Studies, just as a rough guideline. As Americans continue to debate what to do about the humanitarian crisis in the Middle East, this analysis attempts to estimate the costs of resettling refugees from that region in the United States. Although we do not consider all costs, our best estimate is that in their first 5 years in the United States, each refugee from the Middle East costs taxpayers $64,000, 12 times what the UN estimates it costs to care for one refugee in neighbouring Middle Eastern countries. The cost of resettlement includes heavy welfare use by Middle Eastern refugees. 91% receive food stamps and 68% receive cash assistance. Costs also include processing refugees, assistance given to new refugees, and aid to refugees receiving communities. Given the high cost of resettling refugees in the United States, providing for them in neighbouring countries in the Middle East may be a more cost-effective way to help them. Now, these costs, obviously adjusted for the United States, are not that disparate from the cost of doing so in Europe. Human needs are human needs no matter where you go. They all need somewhere to live, they all need food to eat, they all need clothes to wear, and so on. Which poses a very interesting question. Why are people so pathologically altruist that they feel some strange need to force these people away from their lands, away from their families, away from areas that they've grown up in, that they know, where their families are, where everyone speaks their language, where everyone worships the same god that they do, where everyone eats the same food, listens to the same music, wears the same clothes, to send them somewhere where everything is different, the weather is different, the food is different, the religion is different, the language is different, the people are different. Why do that when you could save 12 people instead of just one? I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that that money that you spent saving that one person saving 12 lives instead. If you chose that option, you wouldn't be able to stand at a train station waving your little placard about how that one person is so welcome in your country to make you feel good about yourself. Save one person, condemn 11 people to die. But hey, you got to do your progressive virtue signaling for the day. Well done, you. So instead of pouring a metric ton of money away, saving a fraction of the number of people that you could do, maybe it would be better off taking some of that money and using it to help people in their own countries. That way the UK can A, save a load of money and actually put it towards things that will benefit people in the UK, such as fixing the NHS, B, save more people in total, and C, avoid the horrendous culture clashes that come from forcing people away from their own countries to come and live in yours. So what of the future? We know that at current levels of migration, the population of the UK is set to grow massively. And we know that migration is generally a net loss financially. We also know that Turkey, a majority Muslim state, is poised to become a new member state of the European Union, thus allowing free movement of its citizens to the rest of the European countries. Given what we already know about the effects that this would have economically, this certainly seems to be unfavourable. On top of that, this would seem to be increasing the likelihood of further cultural clashes within Europe. We are already seeing the negative social effects of the so-called migrant crisis throughout Europe, but those are other topics for other times. For now, I hope that the information presented in this video has been helpful for you, and has helped you come to a more informed conclusion regarding the future of Britain and the EU. Whether it has helped you in your decision that the Eurozone is stronger united, or whether Britain would be better off breaking away and reclaiming its own sovereignty, that is up to you.